Got a bit of a different kind of video today. I've been spending a lot of time on cricket cards, which has become my collecting passion. But I wanted to go back to my roots a little bit and talk about how I got into sports and collecting, and share a little bit about my one of my pieces of my collection. So my grandmother grew up in South Philadelphia in a small house. Raised 5 kids in that house, row home in South Philly, and before that, she was a young, I guess, teenager and loved the Phillies during their magical Whiz kid run. So, who were the Whiz kids? They were the 1950 Phillies, very young team, and they had been a really poor, really poor team for quite a while, and they weren't expected to do much. But this young group of guys, spearheaded by this guy, Richie Ashburn, who always hustled, became kind of this unexpected champion of the National League and made it to the World Series. So my grandmother, fell in love with Richie Ashburn essentially, and she ended up naming my dad after him. So my dad's Richard, so my grandmother passed away a while back, and I didn't get much from her estate. I didn't really want much, but I did get this shirt. So this was her shirt. She loved Richie, and she always said that I reminded her of him. Not a lot of blondes in the Italian family, and I had blonde hair when I was a kid, and kind of similar, I guess, facial structure. So she said I reminded her of Richie, and I had this hanging up in my room growing up, and I loved it. So, it had these pictures of these old cards, and to me, they might as well have been, hundreds of years old. They just look so ancient, but so cool. And on the back, it had, the little Campbell soup guy, and, the very crude black and white images of the back. And you can see this is from 88. So I was born in 82, got this, I'm sure, it was probably a handout from a game. But my grandmother, I think, gave this to me when I was 6. So I had this in my room growing up. You can still see the hole from where the tap mark was in the wall. And I never took it down. I think I had it up through high school, maybe even into college. It was just always up on my wall. So that's the background of Richie and why he's important to me, and the Whiz Kids. So it was probably 5 or 10 years ago that I started realizing, hey, with eBay, I can actually track down a few of these cards. It would be cool to own some Richie Ashburn cards. So, started with some of the, more affordable, least expensive cards. I hadn't really been collecting in earnest at that point, kind of got away from it. Collected a lot when I was, a kid in the late 80s and early 90s, which you'll hear this story from a lot of folks when baseball cards were really popular, but, a little bit too popular, and they printed way too much, and a lot of those cards are close to worthless now. But didn't have many vintage cards. Definitely didn't have any cards from, let's say, the 50s and early 60s. So these were really some of my first vintage cards, and I just felt happy to be able to say, hey, I actually have some genuine Richie Ashburn cards in pretty nice condition from his playing days, and hey, I actually had that one on my wall, so now I have the real version of that. So that kind of started a process of me tracking down more of them. So that was the 63 Topps, where you can see he's no longer in the Phillies at this point. So not my favorite cards. I don't like the idea of Richie in a Mets uniform. Definitely not in a Mets uniform. But that was a 63. This is the 62. Before the Mets, he was with the Cubs. And I think this was his first year post Phillies, and you can see his stats on the back of these, which is so great. That's one of the things I loved about baseball cards growing up. Before the internet, you could just go and look through the cards and see the guy's stats, and see the years where he really dominated. Like you can see for Ashburn, he had 2 really dominant years where he won the batting title. He had 338, and then he hit 350 a few years later. So, sorry for the zoom on this. It's getting a little bit out of focus, but yeah, I think it was 58 that he hit 350 We'll actually see that here in a minute. But so those were his cards post Phillies career. Actually, there's one more in the Cubs uniform here. So this was down here. Then this is a super cool card. You got to say, even if it's not in the Phillies uniform, seeing him with that old school Cubby is actually pretty cool. All right. So, it started like this, and I eventually thought, you know what? I'm actually going to get all the cards on here. So it started a process that I just completed within the last year. Not too anxiously going after these, but as cards came up or went to a couple card shows, I have a friend who's a baseball card dealer who, I bought a few of the cards off him at a card show. But this is the 59 tops. This is the year that he won the batting title, hitting 350. And you can see not a power hitter, right? Only hit 2 homers that year, but got a lot of triples, 13 triples that year. So that's a really cool card because that was really a career year for him. And in the same set, this is one of my favorite cards I own. And at some point, I might actually get a nicer condition one of this. I'm not too condition sensitive. Like, I actually enjoy seeing a little bit of wear on these because you know that somebody had them in their collection, somebody loved them. But this is a really cool card, right? Because, obviously Willie Mays, one of the top 5 players. You can argue top 2 players of all time. But seeing him and Ashburn on the same card, and then the story on the back around they're neck and neck for the batting title. And back then they took this stuff pretty seriously. Willie goes first. Willie comes up and gets 2 hits, right? So you think, oh, okay, he's going to win the batting title. But then Ashburn in the last game of the season goes 3 for 4 and wins the batting crown. So it's super cool story, and you got to see that's really, really cool. All right, so I'll kind of go a little bit faster through those. I think that was a 58. Here's the 57 tops. I am kind of, I don't care too much about the grading, especially on these. But it is nice, to see, confirmation that some of these cards weren't trimmed, and a 4 to me, like, still a really sharp card, and I'm not really sure I'd ever want to upgrade this, to be honest with you, just because it's good enough for me. I don't really care if it's a 4 or a 5 or 6. This is one of the greatest card designs of all time, and it just exemplifies, his hustle spirit, getting into home plate and getting under the tag. Cool. So I think that was a 56. Now I did pick up a few cards that weren't in here as well. So I think this is my only 55. This is actually the 55 Bowman, which this is one of my favorite card designs of all time, the old school TV. Luckily we don't have to watch TV on those anymore. That's the 55 Bowman. Then I've got the 54 tops in a 4. This is actually the 54 Bowman. I've actually got 2 copies of that. I've got the graded 3 as well. And then, so this is really cool. So there are 2, like the 2 oldest cards on here are from 52, 2 iconic sets. So 52 Bowman, you can see this is a slightly smaller card than the tops. But that's the 52 Bowman. And then definitely the top card in here by far, the 52 tops, which this was the most expensive out of this group. Not too expensive, but I actually had my wife pick this up for me for Christmas last year, I believe it was, to kind of finish this run. So with that, I just kind of sat back and looked at the full set of cards I picked up, and it just felt meaningful for me. I know, this is my own personal story, but it's one of the things I love about collecting is the nostalgia and the history, and just connecting back with the past. My grandmother, if she was still around, I think she'd get a real kick out of this, and she'd think I was kind of crazy for having to actually get all the original cards and probably wonder why this old thing wasn't good enough. But I'm just really happy to have these. Just one last thing. I also recently found out about these old exhibit cards. So these are pretty much postcard size, bigger than a normal card, and they have blank backs. But I was just really shocked that you could get these old exhibit cards from the early 50s for really cheap. I was able to pick these up for, I don't know, on average $5 to $10 each. And I saw that they had slightly different variations. So there were some with red tints, and then the ones that I was really excited about were these two here. You can see they have this written in the bottom left, an exhibit card. And these are two of the ones that are, the worst condition. But what I found through my research is exhibit printed, they printed different, slightly different styles in different years. So these are all from 1950 and 1951, but these ones are actually, that little exhibit card says that these are from 1949. So these two were actually printed during his rookie card year. So the same year as his 49 cards, these 49 exhibits were printed. So, the hobby doesn't probably care very much, but for me, knowing that, I've got essentially a Richie Ashburn rookie, and I didn't have to pay, hundreds of dollars for it, I thought was really cool. Just one last thing. I started talking about the Whiz kids at the beginning. I picked up a few other cards from the Whiz kids. Granny Hamner had more than 80 RBIs, which for a shortstop at that time was a heck of a season. Robin Roberts was one of the greatest Phillies pitchers of all time. Still considered one of the top 5 probably Phillies pitchers of all time. And he was, a star pitcher on the Whiz kids. And you can see he spent a lot of years on the Phillies, and he was quite young during those Whiz kid years. I think it was just his 3rd season. And then Del Ennis. Del Ennis was actually the star of the Whiz kids team. He led the team in average, home runs, RBIs, basically all the major batting categories. And this is his rookie card, which I was able to pick up cheap. Again, not too concerned about condition. Was just happy to get a nice issue of Del Ennis' rookie card. I believe this is 49 Leaf. I did not have any cards from this set either, so it was kind of neat just to get a card from this set. So, the story with the Whiz kids doesn't end great. The Phillies, after that year, never were able to pull the magic back together. They ended up having, a lot of mediocre seasons, and a lot of people wondered why. Was it just that they caught lightning in a bottle for that one season? There's one theory that says, that baseball was integrating at that point. Jackie Robinson was already in the major leagues, and teams were rapidly bringing in new players from, black players and Caribbean players. But the Phillies, and especially other teams like the Red Sox, were unwilling to integrate. So the Phillies were an all-white team throughout the 50s. They didn't bring in their first black player until 57. So they got kind of lapped. I think of the great players that were in the league during that time. You're missing out on Willie Mays and Jackie Robinson and all these unbelievable players. So, basically through prejudice and probably through some, guys kind of not being quite as good as they had hoped. Like Del Ennis probably never put together another season like that. But because of that, the Phillies were never great again. That was their one great year in that run. But a great year it was, and stuck with my grandmother, and I'm thankful for the stories.